When your team has a project, it's so easy to get excited and want to expand and explore and look at possibilities. And sometimes, if you're working with a client, the project might expand beyond your ideas, and sometimes things can get a little bit out of control. See, the scope of your project can easily and quickly and sneakily expand beyond what you originally imagined and turn into a little monster of an undertaking. And it reminds me of one of the greatest scope creeps I've ever experienced in a project that nearly resulted in death. See, every year, my dad and I partake in a long-distance bike race called Tulsa Tough. Now, Tulsa Tough is one of the top cycling events in the nation. It's a 3-day tournament of craziness and fun. Now, my dad and I are not by any stretch of the imagination professional bikers. In fact, we are absolutely amateur. In our very first race, I was racing on a mountain bike, and my dad was racing on a 1970s bike that was rescued from the garbage. So we are very amateur, even though we have improved our equipment since then. See, 2 years ago, my dad and I were in the middle of the race, and we decided at about mile 50 that we were feeling good. In fact, we were feeling really good. And so we really didn't want the race to end. Our legs were fresh, the weather was nice, we were making good time, we were enjoying ourselves, and we didn't want the race to end in 10, 15 short miles. And so it was at this point that we decided in the middle of the race that we were going to change our course and finish out the full 100-mile race. We were supposed to do 65. We decided to tackle on another 35 miles to our race. So we made it to mile 65 and we were still feeling good. Mile 75, we were feeling pretty good. We were going strong, but starting to get a little bit tired. And then at about mile 80, we made a wrong turn. See, we still were following a trail, but we began following Sunday's trail and we were racing on Saturday. So that meant that we didn't have our rest stops anymore. There wasn't anyone there to give us water. We had gone the long way around. We had just added an additional 20 miles to our race. And soon enough, the sun came up. And in June, Oklahoma, it was blasting heat on us. We had prepared for 2 more rest stops, but now we had depleted all of our water and all of our food and all of our supplies. We were in the middle of farm country in Oklahoma, and there was not a soul in sight besides horses and cows. And so we did, in fact, at some point see a skyscraper, the Tulsa skyscraper, and we thought we could make it. My dad and I are very optimistic people, and so we were encouraging each other to keep on going. One more hill. We got this. We can do this. And then after we made it over yet another hill, I looked back and I saw that my dad had stopped sweating and he was pale white. We called the event medical attention. That brought us through the finish line and straight to an IV. This chill father-daughter experience soon turned very scary. We both had suffered from heat exhaustion, dehydration, and even though I had put on copious amounts of sunscreen, I was very, very burnt. None of this would have happened if we would have stuck to our original scope of our project of 65-mile race. See, scope creep in your organization probably won't end you up on an IV. At least, I hope not. But here are a few things that you can do to avoid scope creep in your teams and in your projects.
First, define the scope of your project. What is a part of this project and what's not? And then set estimations.
See, estimations will help define your scope. It'll help set a standard and help set an expectation for the scope of your project. Now, there are different methods and techniques for creating your estimations. It could be through story points, it could be through a bucket list. There are different techniques that you can use. But in any case, the factors that you should consider include the hours or the time spent, the resources that are going to be needed, the manpower that you will use, any estimations for any bugs or any hiccups, any delays, any detours that you might have to take, like going an extra 20 miles in addition to adding on an extra 35 miles. What are the estimates that you have and the standards that you have set for your project? After you have created an estimation to set an expectation, you must have a change process within that. So after you have defined the scope, if you want to change the scope, if you want to alter it, what is the change process? Now, there is a big difference between having a team that is agile, having a team that can quickly move as needed, and a team that is frivolous and making very hasty decisions and adding on more and changing the scope very quickly without any sort of process. So in our situation, with my dad and I as the two-person team, we decided on a whim our change process was in the middle of our project. We were going to add an additional 35 miles. In the future, we have decided that if we want to change our process, we will have more of a discussion before we decide on a whim to take on such an endeavor. So in your team, have some sort of a process that will help you define, okay, is this process necessary for us to be agile, or is it a little bit more frivolous? And finally, you must, if there are a lot of things that are added on to the project, if there's a lot more that is added on and the scope continuously keeps on changing, understand that it's totally okay to take all of those ideas and place them in your backlog and include those in another project. That's absolutely fine. It wasn't that my dad and I couldn't do 100 miles. We simply hadn't prepared for it. We didn't have the resources. We didn't have our people back at camp. They were expecting us at one time and we came at a very different time. There was a lot of miscommunication with that, and the scope that we had created for one project was not going to fit into our new project that we decided to change to very quickly. And so it wasn't that we couldn't do 100 miles, it's that probably was a project that we should have put a pin into and done at a later date. And so understand that it's okay if you want to add more and you want to do more, but if it's a lot, if it is outside of the scope of your project, then that is a great idea to put a pin in and to readdress at a later time in a different project. See, the next year and every year after that, we have stayed within our agreed upon scope in our Tulsa Tough race. We estimate our time, our stops, our snacks, our water, our sunscreen, and our ride time. We have a process for our change, meaning we don't randomly add 35 additional miles at the very last minute. And I might race 100 miles in the future, but that is going to be a project for a different time. See, team performance is dramatically affected by scope creep. So protect the scope of your project and stay away from IV-warranted situations. And that is one way that you can help build performance within your team.